Hello, my name is Kai Kennedy. I am the Accessibility and Inclusion Training Specialist for Boston's Mayor's Commission for Persons with Disabilities, and this is Disability 101. In this training, we will provide a brief explanation of the Americans with Disabilities Act, or ADA, Titles 1 through 5. We will also provide some quick tips on how to accommodate and interact with members of the disability community, including acceptable language. And at the end, there will be a section to assess your understanding. Passed in 1990, the Americans with Disabilities Act, or ADA, is a civil rights law that prohibits discrimination based on disability. The ADA is divided into 5 titles. Title 1, covering employment. This prohibits disability-based discrimination and requires covered employees to provide reasonable accommodations for applicants and employees with disabilities. Title II covers state and local government. This prohibits these entities from refusing disabled persons participation in their services, programs, and activities. It also prohibits requiring participation in services, programs, and activities that are designed specifically for persons with disabilities. This title also requires effective communication with persons with disabilities. This would mean that if somebody needs something in large print, braille, or an audio form in order to have access to the program, service, or activity, state and local government is required to make those accommodations. Title III covers public accommodations such as restaurants, grocery stores, hotels, and more. These places must be accessible for persons with disabilities, and all new construction and renovations of these places must be fully ADA compliant, and existing barriers must be removed if it is readily achievable to do so. Title IV covers telecommunications. This requires common carriers such as telephone companies to provide telecommunication relay services for callers who are deaf, hard of hearing, or with speech-related disabilities. And finally, Title V is a miscellaneous provision. This prohibits coercion, threatening, or retaliation against individuals with disabilities or those attempting to aid persons with disabilities in asserting their rights. In 2021, about 11% of residents in the city of Boston identify as having a disability. This chart from the American Community Survey shows information on percentages of disabilities within the city of Boston. The most common reported disability is mobility, followed by cognitive, independent learning, self-care, and hearing and vision. There are about 77,600 people living in the city of Boston with some form of disability. We are neighbors, employers, parents, voters, workers, consumers, and even tourists. And in fact, Boston is host to potentially 1.5 million disabled tourists each year. We live in every neighborhood of Boston, but accessible housing continues to be difficult to find for many people with disabilities. Here's some information on our office, the Mayor's Commission for Persons with Disabilities. We aim to increase opportunities for persons with disabilities in the city of Boston by ensuring full and equal participation in all aspects of life. We work on eliminating barriers in policies, procedures, programs, and services, as well as architecture, communication, and attitudes. In order to do this, we have a few programs, services, and initiatives. The On-Street Accessible Parking Program, or OSAP, is a program that our office oversees. This is the installation of accessible parking spots in business areas and in front of neighborhood residences. Our architectural access team leads the effort in creating ideal accessibility in Boston's built environment by going beyond meeting just minimum ADA compliance. We also foster community engagement with events, trainings like these, and many others, and our newsletter. And finally, the Boston Commission Advisory Board is host to 13 Boston residents appointed by the mayor to keep the city informed of important issues in the local disability community. Our office works with other departments within the city of Boston to ensure that all of their programs, services, outreach, and communications are not only ADA Title II compliant, but fully accessible and inclusive. We do this by offering technical assistance, trainings on various ADA and disability-related topics. We also provide accessibility checklists for events, meetings, outreach, and more. We review plans for street and sidewalk construction, design, review of city-owned buildings, schools, libraries, parks, and all public spaces. We also review large-scale private construction projects, such as office buildings, housing developments, colleges, hospitals, and more. Our work is proactive. We want to ensure that access is built in from the beginning. We help departments to establish policies for accessibility, inclusion, communication, and reasonable accommodations. In this section, we'll go over some of the best practices for disability inclusive and affirming language. Language within the disability community is evolving all the time, so we have to keep this in mind when interacting with persons with disabilities. Words and phrases that were once commonly used may now be considered offensive. It's important to pay attention to the language that disabled people use when referring to themselves and others and use it as a model. As a general rule, we avoid terminology like afflicted with, suffering from, and wheelchair bound, as these terms can imply helplessness. Some terms like crippled, slow, and retarded are now considered slurs and should not be used to describe anyone, disabled or not. The term handicap is also outdated and can typically be replaced with disabled or accessible depending on the circumstance. For example, instead of saying handicap bathroom, you can say accessible bathroom, or instead of saying handicapped person, you can say disabled person. This chart provides some don't say this, say that information about commonly used words and phrases. For example, the handicapped can be replaced with person with disability or disabled person. The deaf or hearing impaired can be replaced with person who is deaf or hard of hearing. The word midget can be replaced with the word little person. The phrases high and low functioning can be replaced with low and high support needs. The terms insane, crazy, psychotic, or psycho can be replaced with person with a mental health disability. The term the blind can be exchanged with person who is blind or low vision. The term on the spectrum or person with autism can be replaced with autistic or neurodivergent. The phrases confined to a wheelchair or wheelchair bound can be replaced with wheelchair user or this person is in a wheelchair. And the term or phrase person who is mentally retarded or has mental retardation can be replaced with person with an intellectual disability. We also want to stay away from using these terms in casual conversation. So, for example, instead of saying something like this event is so lame, try saying this event is boring. Lame is a term that has been historically used to describe persons with physical disabilities. Instead of saying this paperwork is insane, which is often a term used to describe people with mental health disabilities, we can try saying, this is a lot of paperwork. Using a disability as a descriptor for something unrelated is also offensive. So, for example, saying the weather has been bipolar when really you mean it's been unpredictable or inconsistent. Sometimes non-disabled people unintentionally say offensive things. So when you say something like, you're too pretty to be disabled, what we really hear is disability is ugly. Or I can't imagine what your life must be like. We hear, your life is horrifying to me. In this section, we will go over some best practices to support accessibility for all types of disabilities. Accessibility is when the needs of people with disabilities are specifically considered, when products, services, and facilities are built or modified so they can be used by people with disability. Some people who have disabilities that affect their hearing, speaking, reading, writing, vision, sensory integration, or processing of information. These people need communication access accommodations. Some example of communication accommodations could be large print, sign language interpreter, alternative text, closed or open captions, braille, and digital copies of materials. Here are some best practices when working with sign language interpreters. Speak normally, there's no need to raise your voice or slow your pace, and always look and respond to the deaf person and not their interpreter. In a group, make sure only one person speaks at a time, and never nod as if you understand a deaf person when you don't. People who have disabilities that affect how they interact with the environment need physical or sensory accessibility. Physical accessibility might include things like a stair and obstacle-free route, curb ramps, accessible parking spots, and more. And sensory accessibility can include things like noise-canceling headsets or earplugs, warm and low lighting rooms, and sensory deprivation rooms. Some more examples of physical and sensory accommodations include tactile warnings, accessible bathrooms and parking, use of headphones in shared spaces, elevators, ramps, and warm and low lighting areas. Some best practices to support physical accessibility include holding events in places that have physical accessibility, prioritizing accessible bathroom stalls and accessible seating on public transit for persons with disabilities, not standing on curb ramps and tactile plates, and removing any barriers from a path of travel like trash cans that might be blocking a sidewalk. Some best practices to support sensory accessibility include refraining from using flashing or strobing lights at events, keeping phone conversations and music to low volumes or using headphones, and avoid using neon-colored flyers and signs where you can help it. In this section, we will go over some best practices for interacting with persons with disabilities. When you encounter someone using a wheelchair, do not push or touch their chair before asking. Even if you think they need help, make sure you ask first. Don't be offended if they say no. When using public transportation, always reserve accessible seating for disabled people. When encountering a service animal, remember, they are working animals and not pets. You should never pet or engage with the animal unless asked to by the owner. When using a public bathroom, please prioritize accessible stalls for persons with disabilities. When greeting a person who is blind or has low vision, always identify yourself and others who may be with you auditorily. It's also a good idea to explain where you are in reference to them. For example, you can say, I'm to your left or I'm in front of you. You may be asking, how can I make Boston more accessible? Keep an open mind about language changes and adjust yours where necessary. Understand the need for accessible parking and leave it for those who need it. Encourage participation of persons with disabilities in community activities by holding meetings and events at accessible sites. Advocate for a barrier-free environment and accept disabled people as individuals capable of the same needs and feelings as people without disabilities. In this section, we will assess your understanding of the topics covered in this training. What title of the ADA does the Boston Disability Commission work to ensure citywide compliance? Is it Title II, Public Services, Title III, Public Accommodations, or Title V, Miscellaneous? If you selected Title II, Public Services, you are correct. The City of Boston's Disability Commission works to ensure citywide Title II ADA compliance. Public entities that provide services to non-disabled people cannot deny disabled people the same services because of their disability. Fill in the blank. My cousin. Your options are has autism, is autistic, or is slow. Let's select has autism. This answer may vary. Though an overwhelming majority of the autistic community does not agree with the use of this phrase, some autistic people do prefer it. And many doctors, therapists, and parents of autistic children still use this term as well. So please use it with caution. Let's select my cousin is slow. The term slow has historically been used as an insult for persons with intellectual disabilities. Not only is this term offensive and outdated, autism is also not an intellectual disability. And finally, let's select my cousin is autistic. Being autistic is a fundamental part of an autistic person's being and cannot be separated from them any more than the color of their eyes or skin. This term is not offensive. You can say that somebody is autistic. You see a wheelchair user having trouble making their way around a barrier. What is the best practice for how to approach the situation? Your options are physically assist by pushing the person's wheelchair around the barrier for them, reporting the incident by taking a photo of what you see and reporting it to the Disability Commission, or offering to assist, asking the person if they would like your help, and if so, what is the best way to help? Let's select report the incident. While you can absolutely file a grievance in regards to ADA Title II violations in Boston, it is not necessary or appropriate to take a photo of another person and send it to our office. Let's select offer assistance. It is perfectly acceptable to offer your help to a person if you see this, and if they accept, make sure you understand how they would like you to help them. In summary, the City of Boston's Disability Commission works very hard to ensure the well-being of persons with disabilities by ensuring Title II ADA compliance across the city. With approximately 11% of Boston's residents identifying as being disabled, it's important to keep best practices in mind when it comes to interacting and language use. Persons with disabilities are people and deserve the same access and inclusion as people without disabilities. Thank you so much for joining us for this training. If you have questions about the content or would like to schedule a different training, please contact our office via voice at 617-635-3682 or via email at disability@boston.gov.